We are in September and the school year has started for students of all ages, including adults. During the last 2 weeks of September, the Manitoba Conservatory of Music and Arts will be offering a fantastic 2-week course called Musical Cities, New York. This is an opportunity to delve into the venues, the composers, and the musical legacy of New York City with well-known broadcaster and music history whiz, Andrea Ratuski. To tell us more about the course is my friend and teacher of the course, Andrea Ratuski. She's joined me here over Zoom. Hi, Andrea. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Chris. It's great to see you again. Thank you.
So we are in September, and you've got a course that's coming up the last 2 weeks of this month. It's happening on Wednesday, the 22nd and Wednesday, the 29th, and we are off to New York. This is not the first Musical Cities course you've taught through the conservatory. What made you choose New York City this time around?
Well, I have, it's true, touched on a lot of European centers, Vienna, Paris, London, and some centers in Eastern Europe, Venice. But I thought we should branch out to other parts of the world. And what better city? New York. It's a music mecca, a cultural center of the world. And well, pandemic aside, it's still going strong with all these cultural institutions that are still really thriving.
Mm-hmm. I used to get the New York Times delivered to my house. I'm sort of going on a tangent here. I used to get the New York Times delivered to my apartment when I was living in the States. And every Sunday morning, I'd be awoken with the Times hitting my step. But I used to love looking at it for the huge arts and specifically music section that was in the Times. It was really quite something. So there's a lot there. I mean, there's New York is a musical hub, but there's composers such as Copeland, Bernstein, and Gershwin. But you also have in the institutions, Juilliard, the Met, Carnegie Hall, and I guess Broadway. How are you going to divide up the course is only taking place over 2 classes. How are you going to divide up all the meat?
I know, I'm so aware that, I could do a 4-week course just on Leonard Bernstein. So it is going to be a bit of a whirlwind. So, just imagine we're in New York and we've only got a certain number of hours. And so we're going to whirl and whiz through it. And I mean, it is such a beautiful city as well. So it's a PowerPoint presentation with images. So we'll have lots of incredible images of the city, the skyline, and some of the magnificent buildings. And so yeah, Carnegie Hall, which opened in 1891. Interesting that to inaugurate Carnegie Hall, who did they invite to conduct a concert? Tchaikovsky. So he made the long trip by steamship to New York to perform and to inaugurate Carnegie Hall. And the city of New York made this huge impression on him as well, like the architecture and just the people were so friendly, he thought, and welcoming. And of course, they were awestruck. And he was struck himself by the fact that they thought he was like their musical hero. So it was an auspicious opening to Carnegie Hall, and of course, it's been the concert hall for so many world premieres. Some of the greatest musicians, Heifetz, Callas, jazz, and other musical and literary presenters as well.
So it's a PowerPoint presentation, which actually sort of leads to the next question. It's the two classes are being taught over Zoom. Does that add some advantages to teaching in a normal classroom setting? Like, can you present the material easier over Zoom? Like, how have you found that? This is not your first Zoom class.
I have to say, before I did my first one, I was very nervous. But in fact, I think it works very well because it is a PowerPoint. So basically people's screens is the entire presentation. So, we've got the images of, various musical venues and sites of New York, but also the composers, and the music is for the most part music videos. And, of course, they're so stupendous because you get close-ups of musicians and that sort of thing. So I think from my perspective, I think it's very nice because it's feels very immediate to me. Of course, the hard part is that you don't have all the people, right in front of you to respond to the music, and you can't sort of tell, are they enjoying it? What's happening? And then just the business of the interaction and how we incorporate people's questions into the presentation or their comments, and how do they feel about the music, that sort of thing.
There's also, whenever I think of New York, I always think of it as sort of being this mecca of new music. There's all kinds of like amazing new sounds and composers coming out of New York. I'm always reminded of the story of Steve Reich wallpapering the inside of his cab with rejection letters from his compositions. And now, he's a world-renowned composer. You're going to be focusing a little bit on new music in the out of New York in the course as well, right?
Yeah. Yes. Definitely Steve Reich and Philip Glass, the two premier composers that we associate with minimalism, even though they, of course, hate the term, just like Debussy hated the word impressionism. But nevertheless, there'll be strong emphasis on their music, and it's still going strong. I mean, they were writing back in the 70s, and Steve Reich with this just such interesting music, where things come in and out of phase, and he really has this idea that he wants listeners to be able to follow the process of the piece unfolding, and it unfolds very, very gradually. And he likened it to watching a clock and watching a minute and watching the seconds tick by. And so just watching it develop, and what that does to your state of mind, everything slows down, and it draws you in, and you are really concentrating to hear how is the music shifting. And then Philip Glass with his these recurring triads, this sort of rhythmic momentum that just propels you forward. And again, with the changes happening very, very gradually.
Yeah. I find Philip Glass's music groovy for that reason, and because of the way he puts stresses on different beats. I was reading on the Conservatory's website as well. You're going to be talking a little bit about Meredith Monk and Laurie Anderson as well. I don't know these composers. Who are they?
I know, and they're really quite out there. Meredith Monk, vocalist and involved in all sorts of media, and she's been around for decades. There was a big celebration at Carnegie Hall actually for her 50th anniversary of on the stage, and to see her is very interesting. She has these braids. She wears her hair in braids. So she's very kind of sort of recognizable in that way. And so she writes very interesting but challenging music for voices. And often it's just for voices alone. And you hear some hocketing and, the voices kind of going bump, 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 bump like that.
Yeah.
And so very interesting. Laurie Anderson into multimedia kinds of things as well. And she's made some cool music videos. So we'll touch on those composers, and younger composer active in New York right now, Judd Greenberg. And so there's that. And we're even going to touch on John Cage, who is... you're laughing.
So there's going to be some silence for what, 433?
We'll discuss the idea of silence that played a really important role in Cage's music. But he was such an innovator. We are going to hear one of his pieces for prepared piano. He was very interested in percussion and inventing instruments and that sort of thing. And then that kind of extended to his writing for piano. And so he had this idea of preparing a piano, meaning that you can put nuts and bolts and dinner forks and feathers onto the strings of the piano. And so when you strike the key, it makes a totally different sound. So in fact, it's like changing it into a percussion instrument. And he was just so innovative in that way. And even he was called an inventor rather than a composer, and to a certain extent that's true. So he was interested in that. He was interested in chants, aleatoric music. So sometimes musicians would be given their parts, but they could play them in any order, or it didn't matter which instrument you played them on. So there was not everything was prescribed. And so some people thought, well, that's not really composing, but for others, it was just a way of opening up. There's just new ideas. You can try new things. And I think that really helped encourage people to think about different ways of writing music. It's like a far cry from the early days, the late 19th century and even beginning of the 20th century, when composers in America didn't have a voice yet. And in fact, they felt they needed to go to Europe to compose, to learn, to study. So many of them, you needed that stamp of approval. And so to a certain extent, in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, audiences were expecting European type music, European sounding music. So Edward MacDowell, one of the earlier American born composers, his music is very European sounding, and
Right.
so it's in the early 20th century where you see composers starting to think about, well, what is our American voice? And in fact, there's no American voice. So for much of the course, we'll actually be talking about three of the most famous composers that you mentioned: Gershwin, George Gershwin, Aaron Copland, Leonard Bernstein. Very, very interesting. They were very different composers. They all lived in the 20th century. In fact, Gershwin and Copeland were only 2 years apart, born in 1898 and 1900. But Gershwin was very jazz oriented, and he developed his chops in the Tin Pan Alley, playing those popular kinds of songs on the piano, and then writing those songs with his brother Ira, writing the words. So very jazz influenced. Copeland started off in jazz influenced music as well, was experimenting in modernism, but then really started to think about American folk song.
Yeah.
So a different kind of take on that. And then Bernstein, a generation younger, the connection there is interesting because he performed Rhapsody in Blue and American in Paris, and he kind of adopted those pieces. He just was so passionate about them. And as a pianist, conductor, he took on those pieces. He made them his own, basically. Just he was so fond of them.
And counted Aaron Copland as probably one of his closest friends.
Absolutely. He was younger, and he wrote, it was kind of like a fan letter to Aaron Copland when he discovered his music, and wrote him this kind of gushy letter saying, "You're absolutely an American master." And then they met and they hit it off, and they just had such a fabulous relationship. Bernstein conducted his music everywhere, championed it. But in his younger days, Copeland gave him a musical advice on his compositions. And, he would say something like, "Oh, get rid of these passages. It's too much like so-and-so, and start here because that's your original voice." So really, really strong relationship there, and great connections.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, the course sounds just amazing. Once again, it's happening over 2 Wednesdays, Wednesday, the 22nd of September and the 29th of September. How much is the course, and where can people go to register?
They can go to MCMA, Manitoba Conservatory of Music and Arts, their website, and they can sign up there. And the course is $50.
$50, yeah. So, I mean, you can't go wrong. I mean, 2 classes for $50 and just delving into the city that is New York. It just sounds amazing. And for our Classic 107 listeners, I'll provide a direct link to the registration page on the Conservatory's website in the article that will be up on our website, classic107.com. Andrea, it's been so great to chat with you today. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me. You're going to set up a piece of music that you'll be talking about in the course. Do you want to set it up for us?
Sure. All right. It's music by Aaron Copeland, and it's his Fanfare for the Common Man. And this is it's a piece. He wrote it in 1942. So imagine wartime. And the conductor Eugene Goossens wanted to commission a number of American composers to write a fanfare, and it was all for the war effort in a way of bolstering the feelings of the Allied forces. And so Copeland was one of them who was asked, and he wrote his fanfare. But instead of dedicating it, to the troops or that kind of thing, he called his fanfare for the common man. And I think this is typical of Copeland. It reflects he was politically involved and very socially conscious, and he always had the heart and soul of the people in mind, and he just had a way of rousing an audience and reaching an audience. So he, in a way that wouldn't scare them or frighten them, but he was at this point in his musical career, he was drawn to this idea of simplicity and that way of reaching listeners as well. And so the piece has this power to it. So he starts off with these big open chords, and you think of fifths and fourths, almost like folk music,
right?
But the sound, like it's belted out by the brass, and there's this amazing percussion, and so it's just so powerful. But it unfolds very gradually. Also, you've got an idea presented, and then there's a breath, and it repeats, and there's another breath, and it goes on, and so it just has this way of touching listeners, and it's something that I think many people have come to associate with this American sound, if there is such a thing. And the piece itself, it's almost like an anthem.
Yeah, and movie composers now, they rip off the fanfare for a common man whenever they want to create the sound of Americana. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly right. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the recording that I'll be playing in the course is I'm very fond of it because Bernstein is conducting and Copeland is in the audience, and so they have some shots. It's a video performance with Copeland in the audience as well.
Right. Sounds great. Let's hear it.